thank you everyone for being here today. We'll do some quick introductions and then we'll dive into more about MQA. I'm Vicki Nauman. I run the consultancy Cross Border Works, and I work with a lot of tech companies helping them make sense of the music industry. And I'm really thrilled to be here talking with Bob Stewart, who is founder of MQA. Bob, welcome.
Oh, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here and good to see you again, Vicky.
I know it's been a few years.
Yes, it has, but that's okay.
Exactly.
Especially now we're not traveling.
I know exactly. Well, I'm hoping that we might actually cross paths in person because after all, this is a relationship driven industry and we need to see each other in
Absolutely. Well, I'll just give a little introduction. I'm Bob Stewart. Yes, I'm the founder and chairman, CTO of MQA. Prior to that, I started a company called Meridian Audio, which I started in the 1977. So for some time, I was a manufacturer of high-end audio and very interested in digital audio process. We became interested in digital audio, did a lot of research in that. Actually, back there, we even invented lossless compression. This is even before 2000. But these days, since 2014, my full-time work is with MQA.
Well, you've been around, Meridian is one of the brands that's known for audio quality. And you've been around since the beginning of the digital revolution when Napster came around and disrupted everything. And we went from having CD quality, uncompressed music to highly compressed MP3s. Um, there were a lot of debates in those early days about is it quality or convenience? What is it that consumers are going to care about the most? And because we had all sorts of problems with the delivery of music and networks and storage capabilities, everyone interpreted convenience was more important than audio quality. Do you think are we finally beyond that now?
The answer is yes and no. You know, my work began in the analog era, before digital existed. And when digital came, obviously we were very interested in it because digital has a promise that we can store the music. We can store it without damage and we can transmit it more easily without damage. And those are real benefits. But even at the beginning of digital, people were arguing about the sound quality. Was it as good as analog, you know? And maybe the biggest movement to digital audio for the consumer was the compact disc. We basically went from vinyl to CD. And for the music industry, that was hugely important because it brought a very clear sound, a better sound, and a more robust form of distribution to everybody. What you mentioned is where it started to go more wrong, if you like, was about the same time as some of us, some of our partners in Japan, colleagues, and ourselves were looking at doing higher quality, going from CD to high resolution. That was around 2000. We ended up with the internet and piracy and MP3, and that was a huge fall in quality for everybody, no question about it. And yes, at one level, the journey that we've taken from the consumer's point of view is every time we give a choice of convenience over quality, it seems that convenience has been chosen. Um, and sound quality has often suffered. And all the way through the whole era of MP3 and the beginning of streaming, sound quality has been lower than it was back in the 1990s, 1980s with compact disc. So that's kind of strange. And at one level, we're almost back to where we were in 2000 in terms of sound quality. Of course, higher quality and high resolution sits on top of that. But the MQA project was all about recognizing the fact that actually digital could sound a lot better, and that not only could we do better than CD lossless quality, we could actually bring you right into the studio. And a number of insights came to us, from human auditory science and from modern digital processes, where we were able to solve what we saw as important problems, not only for the consumer, but for the artists and the producers and the labels. Problems like an enormous amount of effort would go into making the sound great in the studio, but yet most people are listening to it in much lower quality. And we didn't believe that the consumer asked for lower quality, ever. We just think that they would gravitate towards higher convenience. And so with MQA, we were recognizing that we could make the audio more efficient, better sounding, and that would lead to more of a switch between convenience and quality. But the other things in there is what we call the authenticity, the provenance of the sound. Because if you think back in the history of recorded music, music was made on vinyl discs or CDs, and these were mastered, and the process of creating it is like printing process, stamping process, right? So everybody got the same thing. But in the digital era, we had this steady evolution of not precise and sometimes careless practices in the distribution of the audio. The file would go to one place and it would be changed and sent to another and changed and sent to another. And so with that going on, people weren't ending up even with what was done in the studio. So part of what MQA was also trying to do was not just improve the sound and improve the convenience with the lower data rate, but to make sure that people actually got what the artist intended, what the producer and the mastering community had spent so much time making this great sound. I'm sorry if that was a long answer to that question, but it's a big topic, and we think that sound quality and delivering actually the real sound is what consumers are responding to, and needed to have that opportunity given the real dive in quality that appeared from 2000. Yeah.
Well, it's fascinating to me that you were really focused on artists and the studio and really putting the music out as it was intended, as it was created. I think that's critical because at the time, in that era from probably 2000 to 2010, part of what was going on was that people, our phones and our devices didn't have very much storage capability. Networks were really throttled in terms of how much bandwidth you had and what you had to use for your entire household. There were all sorts of constraints that almost forced convenience to become the baseline of functionality, that yes, you could actually download a song in an MP3 format onto a phone or a laptop or some digital device.
Yeah.
And then, but I think the question that you were able to really continue to hone in on, which was, is that enough? And that there's something better than these compressed MP3s and compressed streaming. And you didn't just take an approach of what was done in the analog days, but you really looked holistically at systems for storage, encoding, delivery, audio quality. Can you talk a little bit about how you came up with this concept of MQA?
Yeah. Well, so that you're exactly right. I mean, in the early days of the internet, data was extremely precious. And although these days it's easier for people to have more and more bandwidth, it's not true for everybody on the planet by any means, but we can have more bandwidth. And that does allow you to send higher quality. However, what we mustn't do, I think it's quite incorrect to do, is to use too much data, right? Because we can make a recording in the studio, and we can record it at a low sample rate or at a high sample rate. And the higher the sample rate we use, you get an improvement in the sound, but you also use a lot more data. And one of the interesting problems that's going to be facing us, I believe, is that the internet is using a significant percentage of the energy of the whole planet. It's measurable. And so a streaming service actually has a carbon footprint, which is something that is often not talked about. How much is not only the cost of streaming, but what is the environmental impact of that? So that's important. That's a kind of practical thing. At a philosophical level, what we discovered was a better way to capture the sound without using too much data, but actually to get the real whole sound. And one of the practical benefits that brought for us was being able to have one file. So if you think about what you're talking about, people might have had CDs at home, they might have downloaded big files into the hi-fi system, but on the road they wanted MP3s on their phone, and they end up with the music very scattered. You need a different kind of file to play back in the car or the phone and so on. And very serious data caps in some territories, like you say. If you've got 5 gigabytes a month, you're not going to do much video, and you're certainly not going to do much audio. So these things make a huge difference. So we looked at this and we thought, well, there's a technical solution here, but the problem that we want to solve is important for the music, because the artist's voice is important, and we firmly believe, and we show it. I believe we show it. You'll see it in the reviews. You'll see it in the comments that's made about us by mastering engineers, that we are delivering that sound. And the more clearly you hear the music, the more you enjoy it, and the better emotional response you're going to have to it. And that's a key point. So delivering it with more convenience and with authenticity, so it's genuine. That's what it was really about. And like I said earlier, I don't think anyone ever asked for lower quality. It's just one of the things that happened. And we've been pushing really hard for a decade to raise the standards. And I think we're seeing it. It's the consumers are responding to it. And every time they hear the sound of MQA, they smile and they like it and they understand what it does.
Well, it brings out the layers of music that we lost. And I remember distinctly back in the early days when I was traveling a lot. I had my little iPod Nano, and I got a device that had more storage. I got better headphones, and I re-downloaded some of my music, and all of a sudden I heard a fuzzy guitar and stringed instrument and layers in the music that were gone, and that were not even really discernible in the compressed MP3. But in the same way that I had to get a different device and get different hardware, you had to do a lot of that.
Yes. I mean,
right?
we had to dismantle the whole chain. And the clever thing about MQA was we do it all completely differently from beginning to end, and yet we made it compatible with the existing system, so that you can hear something, you can hear better than CD quality, even if you don't have an MQA device. But the insights that led to this really go into human neuroscience. How do we hear, and what are the kinds of sounds that we're most sensitive to? And what you're talking about, the layers. When you're listening to music, you can differentiate between the instruments. You can hear the acoustics of the room where it's made. You can hear all the nuances. And the nuances in the human voice are incredibly important. So making sure that those were captured and not what we call blurred and smeared is central to MQA. So MQA really is about cleaning the pipe, capturing it, and delivering it, and giving you lots of ways to play it back. One of the nice things about what we were able to do is you get one file or one stream, and you can listen to it on the phone, in the car, on your computer, on a hi-fi system, on the go. One of the most popular products these days that are being made with MQA in Asia and in China particularly is called DAPs, digital audio portable devices, like a big iPod. Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about that, because I think that the you know the quality of music is definitely part of an ecosystem that you have. If you have great quality files, but you're listening to them with your little white earbuds on your phone, it will not sound very good. So it really is about creating a supply chain of getting the music into the DSPs. But at the consumer level, it's
Yeah.
all also about having the right devices and the equipment. And Asia has always been such an exciting place because where you see all the first and most experimental devices. So tell me, I'm curious. I want to hear more about what you just mentioned, this
But,
trend.
so you mentioned a couple of things there. So first of all, it's true that the earbuds maybe not as good as a bigger headphone or as a big loudspeaker system. But when we get it right, and this is what we found in MQA, when we stop the digital getting in the way, and like if you think of it like that, we sort of clean out the distortions, the errors, the poison in the digital, and we make sure at playback that it doesn't get reintroduced, which is another problem because you can have a player that has problems. Um, when we do that, even the simplest earbuds will sound better. And I remember someone very high up in a major label, the first time he played him MQA, he used his small Apple earbuds and he said, these have never sounded so good. So yes, that's important because it's available to everybody. But yes, you can invest in more and more equipment. And actually, we launched MQA in Japan, and at the earliest opportunity, we tried to bring it into China and Korea. So the reason I mention what we would call the Asian markets is that every market is very different with respect to the way they consume content. I mean, you're in America, I'm in the UK. There's a very strong trend to streaming. Um, that's not the case yet in Japan. Uh, we see still like 80% of the media consumed is physical. And a completely unexpected and extraordinary development for us was the labels wanting to put MQA onto discs. So there is a thing called an MQA CD. We got, approaching 1,000 titles, and that's really turned out to be quite successful. It sounds sort of retro from our perspective, but the MQA CD is actually been introduced in the last year to China, and has done really quite well. We've got several titles going in, and 100,000 discs sold in a few months. So that's fascinating. There's also a stronger interest in downloads. So one of our partners in China, Sony Select, offers music for download because, as you say, not everyone's connected all the time. But if you can have your music in your phone, that's fine. You can listen to it. Or if you want to hear it better quality, there's small portable players, and there's so many companies that make these kind of things. But we have partners like Astle and Kern and Hybe and so on. We have, like at the last count, more than 80 models of this pocket music devices that are various qualities, ranging from a couple of $100 right up to a couple of $1,000 in retail price. But people enjoy listening like that, and it's disconnected from their phone because obviously your phone's doing other things, and you want to look after your data plan. But that's a trend that we see quite strongly. Now, streaming is coming to Japan, and in fact, we started a streaming service with Xiaomi Music
Hmm.
about 2.5 years ago. They've temporarily stopped because of some changes with legislation in streaming in China. But we're really hoping that or some other service will get back on board again, because streaming is growing, but so is, for the enthusiasts, the download and the physical media, which is not what we expected. We thought it would all be about streaming.
Well, I've often thought though about how the emotional connection people have with music, and this in the music sector, we have all you can eat streaming companies that, you have access to 30, 40, 50, 60 million songs, far more music than you can ever listen to in a
Yeah,
lifetime. But there's a value in access. But most consumers and people who love music have a very short list of music that's really, really meaningful.
yeah,
And so I can see a world where, vinyl, CD, even really high quality downloads are a companion to an access model where
yeah,
you have music that you can listen to that's great for accompanying you in your daily activities, but then you have your collection over here that really matters.
yeah. And in cultures where collecting is important, and where overtly supporting the artist is important. Some people will want to listen to music on streaming, but they want to go and buy the CD to help the artist. That sort of thing is right. But you're right about everyone has their own window into music, but music is so important to us. It's the soundtrack of our lives. It's it has a strong emotional connection to almost everyone. Um, and one of the interesting things is that since 2000, steadily the quantity of recordings that are made in higher quality, what we call higher resolution, has increased. Although, if you looked at the catalogue of something like Tidal, you would say, well, maybe only 10% of their content is in high resolution. But when we look at the RAA numbers, they would tell us that 70% of what is actually played is in this higher quality. So the most relevant content is in modern, higher quality, and that's very exciting for us. And our friends in the studios tell us that these days only 20% of content that's being made today is being made in CD quality and digital. Everything else is better than that, which is good, because if we capture it in the studio in higher quality, then with MQA techniques we can clean that recording and deliver it and have it arrive, and have people enjoy it. Our goal is people listen to it and they smile, because we take the digital out of the music and connect you directly to the artist's performance. That's the idea.
I think it's fascinating that this in the recording studio, the percentage at CD quality and the percentage at CD quality and above. Because I
Yeah,
also remember back in the dark, it's kind of the dark days of
yeah,
digital, the 2000 to 2010, when everyone was trying to figure out what is the business model, will people ever pay for music again, how is this going to work, that there were actually some discussions that were taking place with labels and people in A&R saying, well, maybe some music styles, are better suited for low quality audio, and kind of looking almost with nostalgia back to the heydays of rock music in the 70s, of having analog and all of the instrumentation, and saying, well, maybe music as a form has just changed.
I,
And
I, I think it's easy to get confused. If you're in a studio and you're being told, well, make it sound as good as you can on MP3, that's a pretty miserable target, right?
exactly.
And and the problem, the tragedy from our point of view is that recordings that are made like that, you lose something from the archive. And I'm a strong believer that the archive is important. You know, one of the things we've been able to do with MQA, with the help of the labels who are our partners, is go right back, not only to the beginning of digital, but into the analog era. If you look at what we're offering today, you know, it's everything from, you know, the earliest days of Ella, from the beginning of Frank Sinatra all the way through, and then early digital. And some of that, in fact, can sound a lot better than later digital, when people were getting confused with compression and squashing and saying, well, it doesn't matter because you're only going to hear it on MP3 anyway. That was a sad cop-out. Yeah, but it's like a continuous education process.
So you've actually been able to go back and almost harmonize
Yes.
decades of different recording techniques and different North Stars of the people in the studios thinking about what they, because everyone who's in the studio, they're thinking about how can I mix this for this particular setting? A person on listening to vinyl on hi-fi, or a person listening to MP3 on a iPod Nano, or a
Yeah,
streaming.
that's right. But somewhere just before that event, they made the final mix. You know, recording was captured, and then the job of the mastering engineer literally is to turn that into a vinyl or a CD or a cassette or a stream. And we try to drill back to that performance, the point where they made the recording, they captured it, and everybody said, this is it. This is it. And it's very easy for people to get bound up in the process. So, you know, they'll master it for one thing, and then one of the great difficulties, and some of the top mastering engineers very frustrated about this, they would create a version and then put it into distribution, and then it would be changed. You know, they might put out a 96K and somebody turns it into an MP3, and then somebody else turns it back into a CD quality. And so you have no idea what you're going to get. And this ability of digital to be fungible, to be changeable in distribution, is a major problem from the quality standpoint of view. And human nature being what it is, people take the easiest route, not just convenience of sound, but convenience of distribution. So we've worked on this, and we recognized to do that that we had to work in the studios, and we take a completely different approach if it's a tape from the 1950s or 1970s, or it's an early digital, or it's a mid-digital. But then at the other end of the chain, where we play it back with our hardware licensees, each one is adjusted to give the closest possible sound. So we make sure that it survives, and that's part of our vision, and it's working well. You know, we've got more than 100 companies making many hundreds of products, and a quarter of our licensees are Chinese companies making things like D2A converters, small portable DACs, portable players, things like that. Yeah.
That's exciting. That's
It is.
exciting because I feel like you know this vision that you had with MQA of delivering the quality audio as the artist had intended. Like, that's very simple. It's very beautiful. It's very pure. And then you marry that with our very messy music ecosystem of networks and distributors and partners and hardware and software and devices.
Mm.
Um, I would imagine there was probably a point at which you you paused and you thought, okay, this is much bigger and much more complicated than we imagined.
We, we knew that it was going to be a huge task, and we knew that because we were changing the way digital was done, some people were not going to be happy with this. You know, if you try and break the model, paradigm shift. But nevertheless, we knew it was so important to get that sound quality out there and to help the ecosystem that we thought, well, we're just going to do it anyway. And yes, there's been there's always challenges, but we're continually impressed, and it's joyful to see it happen. For example, we've talked a lot about distributing recorded music, pre-recorded music, but a big trend um, is that MQA can improve the sound wherever there's audio. So you've probably seen we've made announcements and done things like put MQA audio alongside video. So video with MQA, we're working with a Japanese TV company who's doing test transmissions of TV with MQA sound, and TV sounds even worse than distributed sound for music in many, many parts of the world. Another area is radio. Radio is an important medium. Internet radio has a horrible sound, but we can stream MQA in internet radio. In fact, in the last 2 or 3 months, we launched 2 services. One was Radio Paradise, coming from California, and the other is the Music Bird, a satellite music service in Japan. And more of that, we think, is going to be very exciting, because wherever people listen, if we get the sound better, even if it's a talking book, it doesn't matter what it is. And I think that's really good. So we have these different types of sound media can be delivered in MQA.
That's exciting, and I do feel like there is a point at which where everything just sounds so much more natural,
Yeah.
and that it almost becomes unnatural to hear things that are lower quality or uncompressed, or it sounds old-timey. I'm really fascinated by this 25% of all of the hardware and the partners that you have are in China. So
Yeah.
that to me, that's exciting. So there's a lot of innovation happening. Can you talk? I know there's probably a lot under NDA, but can you talk about any of the things that are coming out of this region?
Well, you mean the brands? Yeah. Well, there's a lot of companies. I mean, you know, and some of the well-known household names we're dealing with. Zorlu, Sony, iRiver, AudioQuest, Asus does the headphones, the gaming headphones. There's iFi, THX. These are made in these categories. Of the Chinese companies, I don't have a list in my head, but they've mostly signed up really inside the last 2 years. That's where the movement went. And one thing I was going to tell you about, we're talking about the different types of sound. TV sound, video sound, radio sound, pre-recorded music. There's a huge interest in China in karaoke, and MQA is really good for karaoke, because if we have the clarity of the backing track and the sound being captured of the would-be artist in this sound quality, it's very exciting, because by removing the digital from the chain, it becomes more organic. So karaoke at home, on the go, is quite a thing. Now that's not something that we see here in the UK, for example, but it's very big, and so we respond to that. It's kind of fun.
I think I've been to a handful of really great karaoke places in Shanghai and Beijing, and
Right.
uh, I can't say that any quality of audio would have improved my performance, but there were some really, really great people in the room.
It might have improved your performance. um,
So,
it's
Bob,
kind
how
of it's kind
when you
of
when you think about the trends and the things that are driving this, and when you think about things like really immersive experiences and gaming, and I've often I've often wondered, music in games sounds better, oftentimes sounds better than many of the music services that we have, and it partially is it's designed around this immersive experience. But what do you feel are the trends and the patterns that are really driving that are driving interest and adoption of MQA and higher quality audio?
It's definitely a love of music and that listening. You mentioned a few things there. Now, gaming. Yes, some gaming can sound great, and that's because there's the budget to make great productions. One of the other things you mentioned is immersive, and that's um, that's subject to being proven because in the history of audio we've had like immersive sound appear 4 times and disappear. And my particular perspective on that is immersive sound is great, and 3D sound in MQA is superb. But if you try to do immersive at the expense of quality, let's say rather than using your bandwidth to transmit high quality, but you dumb it down to have more channels, that's not so good because in truth, in immersive sound, you need even more precision than you do with 2 channels. So to do immersive properly is a step that needs to be done carefully. Otherwise, we'll end up reissuing everything in dumbed down music, and 3 years, 4 years down the road, we'll say, "Hang on a minute, didn't we just do an MP3 again with the sound?"
Right, right. Well, we do tend to make mistakes several times, and then we realize, oh,
Yeah.
right, we've been here before.
Well, obviously, my primary area of interest is human psychoacoustics and audio coding, but I'm also a student of audio formats and the whole thing. And you can see it comes and goes, and the way the technology reads onto the music of the day. But this has been going on since Edison, and there have been times when it's easier to get the music, and there's times when it isn't. Sometimes it speaks to the collector gene, sometimes it's just available. Some people think they don't care, but by our experience, whenever we show somebody better sound, they respond to it. And that's our mission. So whether it's immersive, gaming, or any type of sound, it's the inner quality. It's how clearly do I hear you, or do I hear a bird singing, or whatever it is that we've got in the sound that makes the difference.
Well, and when the option, they're going to they're going to choose to have something that sounds more natural, that sounds fuller, that sounds much more multifaceted and layered. But it's really a challenge because people don't trust their own hearing. They oftentimes think, well, I don't know if but if that's what my favorite artist says is supposed to be great and it comes out of the studio and he endorses it, then I'm good with that. But I don't trust my own ears.
Well, this is an interesting conundrum, but you're right about one thing. We recognize that some people feel that way, and so there's no doubt if the producer or the mastering guy signs it off in the studio and a light comes on when you play it back and says, "This is it," you can say, "I got the organic, I got the real thing." But people think they don't trust their hearing, but actually hearing is our most important sense.
Hmm.
It's the sense that we use for survival. It works in the dark, it works around corners. We believe that we can trust our eyes more, but in fact there's more artifacts and time delay and loss of information between our eyes and the real world than there is with our ears. And actually, everybody can hear well. If you pick up the phone, a voice speaks to you, you probably know who it is. If it's somebody you've met, you'll know who it is. You'll say, "Hi, Bob." Or, if it's a friend, you recognize it immediately, and you learn all the nuances by which we communicate. It's just that our hearing is so flexible. The fact that we can enjoy a song that we like, hearing it coming out of the window as we walk down the street. The cues are few. The sound is damaged, but you like the music, and it takes you there. And the fact that our ears are in fact so robust that we can survive a cocktail party means that we don't feel in absolute terms about it. But actually, when you sit down with the music and you have the sound, you will enjoy it at a much deeper level if the sound is right.
That's so fascinating. I could honestly sit here and listen to you talk about this all day because I do feel like it rings so true to me. The emotional connection not only to the music itself, but to the layers and the sounds that you can discern from it. And But we're out of time, and I want to thank you so much, Bob, for sharing all of these insights. And it's exciting. And I remember when MQA was an idea, and it's so satisfying to see it flourishing and being adopted all over the world. And just really, really fascinating to hear the story.
Well, thank you very much, Vicky. It's been lovely talking to you. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thanks to Music Ally as well.